do virtual work and get paid in US dollars and taxed in US dollars. But there, like I said, there are some requirements. So you have to prove employment or prove income. Some of them have an income threshold, like you have to prove that you are making $3,000 a month. So every single country is different, but that's one thing you can look at, that if you are in a host country that has really complicated laws around registering with the unions and taxation and all that stuff, check to see if they have a digital nomad visa and then follow that process there. But there's not a definitive list, because technically you can work in every country. It's just how much of a paperwork headache is it going to be?
So the question that Beth just answered was, I am self-employed. Is there a definitive list anywhere of the countries with which I cannot work?
Thank you for that. Yes. So no, there's not a definitive list. Next question, are there best areas to look for spouses? One difficulty I see people facing is when they are already overseas and looking for employment and the employers are not willing to hire someone already overseas. So Sheila, great question. There's a couple parts to this. So you'll want to look for host nation local employment. Some countries will actually require you to leave the country in order to apply for a work visa. So let's pretend you're looking for a job in Italy, and you find this great employer, they're willing to sponsor your work visa. However, you can't apply for the work visa while physically in Italy. So you have to jump the border and go to Austria or Germany or go back to the States for a couple of days. There are some really dumb rules that some countries have when it comes to getting a work visa sponsored. So keep that in mind. I also want to share that if you're thinking about like, where should spouses look for US based companies to work overseas, that's not going to be the best answer. Because one, just because you have a virtual job doesn't mean you can do it in a foreign country. That has nothing to do with SOFA. That has everything to do with international corporate taxes, right? So there are a lot of employers that aren't going to be able to support a virtual job overseas in that country because of certain tax laws, because of the way that they require employers to register, because of income or HR thresholds. So there's not really one good spot to look. I would recommend honing in on what your skill set is, and then looking for employers that are abundant in that skill set. So for example, if you are an HR person looking at big HR companies, if you have any sort of a technical background, looking at the big tech companies, they all tend to be more global. So it can be easier to find local host nation employment there. But at the end of the day, there's really not one good place to work, because it really depends on your skill set. It also depends on the employer's ability to support overseas employment, and also what country you're in. So I know that's a very unsatisfying answer.
Thank you, Beth. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box at this time.
Do spouses have to pay double taxes when working overseas, i.e. host country and the US? Rick, great question. Again, depends on the country. So for the most part, we have tax reciprocity for Social Security taxes. Here's what that means. So if you are in Germany, let's say, the tax rate there, I think the overall tax rate is something crazy, like 44%. However, like 11% of that is income taxes that you will never see again. They will be paid. The remaining like 33% of that are what we would call Social Security taxes. And that you can apply to get back when you leave the country. So depending again on the country that you're going to and your state of residence will determine how your taxes are going to work. But as a blanket statement, for the most part, if you are in the country for less than 5 years, when you leave the country, you can apply to get all of your social security taxes back. And that is almost universal, in particular with NATO countries. So take a look at that. And then in terms of double taxation, it depends on your state of residency in the US and what their tax laws are there. So that's pretty tricky. For usually when, like, if your employer sends you overseas, they will also assign you a tax person to help with things exactly like this, or your employer internally will have tax resources to for you to help figure this out. So there's not a clear answer there. If you work for a US based company, do you still need a work visa? So Sheila, yes. Well, depends. So if let's say you're working for like a Booz Allen Hamilton, technically a US based company, but if they are a government contractor and you are doing the work on the installation, no work visa is needed. But if you are working for a US based company, for example, I work for Amazon. If am working for Amazon in Ireland, I still need an Irish work visa and I will still be paid and taxed as if I'm a resident of Ireland. And then I will, again, as I said, once I leave the country, apply to get those Social Security taxes back.
Thank you for those answers, Beth. If you have a question at this time, please type it in the Q&A box. These are really good questions.
Yeah, these are good. Nice and hard. I like that.
Doesn't look like we have anything additional in the chat box, and we don't have any questions in the Q&A box. Okay, if we do not have any further questions, we will conclude this afternoon's webinar. I do want to extend a sincere thank you to Beth Conlon for joining us. Thank you, listeners, also for joining today's webinar. Once the webinar concludes, you will be prompted